Hello, BookTube. It's Wednesday, and that means New Comic Book Day, when vengeful Fortran man-babies haul themselves up out of their Barca loungers and shuffle to the local LCS, the local comic shop, where they add plenty of titles to their pull list, don't buy anything from their existing pull list, and heap scorn over everything that they page through while they're standing there, blocking the shelves from paying customers. And I used to be one of those paying customers. Every Wednesday, like clockwork, when I was in the country, I would go to my local comic shop, whatever it happened to be at the time, and buy the latest issues of whatever I was following. And for one reason or another, I just don't do that anymore. Partly the reason is just practical, financial. In the last 20 years, Marvel and DC Comics, the two lead superhero comic books, have embraced the idea of collecting all of their stuff eventually in book form, in collections, graphic novels, that sort of thing. And that, plus the fact that comic books are so expensive, $3 and $4 and $5 a pop, for something that you're done with in 5 minutes, that those two things combined have sort of disinclined me to follow any weekly comic book, any monthly title. And also there's also the quality consideration that if I would abandon my scruples about the price of a comic book or the fact that it's going to show up in a collection inevitably. I would abandon those scruples pretty quickly if a monthly superhero comic actually made me want to buy it every month rather than wait for a collection down the line. And it's very rare now when one will do that for even an issue, much less 5 or 6 issues. I remember very well, many times in my comic book buying past, when monthly comics from both companies did that easily. When the idea of waiting, even if I'd known there was going to be a trade paperback in 6 months, would have been unthinkable. Not so much now. Not so much now. Writers and artists stay on books for hardly any time. The artists are barely given any time to make a visual imprint on a character before they're off to something else. The storylines to me seem in many cases derivative, either petty or so epic that they're essentially petty. And many of the iterations of these characters, many of the current iterations of these characters and these teams and whatever, just don't hold my interest. But I still like to go to my LCS, my local comic shop, as often as I can. And fortunately, that embrace that I talked about, where the comic companies are embracing books, they're embracing more expensive collection items, allows me to do that. Once upon a time, that wouldn't have been true. But now, now almost every week, there's something that I will at least consider getting, some collection or a commemorative reprint or something like that I'll consider getting. This week and last week, there weren't any. But this week, at the comic shop, a big dedicated comic shop, there'll always be a shelf or two of remainders of previous collections from 10, 12 years ago that are now discounted and still plastic wrapped and everything. They're essentially like book remainders, only for comic books. And I found one today that I very much want. I was very happy to find it. It's this thing. It's the 3rd omnibus edition of the Avengers. I have the 2nd omnibus edition, and I don't have the first one. But this is just reprinting in order all of the issues of the Avengers, starting at Avengers number 1, in these big hardcover editions with high quality color reproduction and nice stiff pages, so that you have this forever. And this volume, the reason it's so thin, comparatively speaking, is because it covers only just about 3 years, 1969, 1970, and 1971. An incarnation of the Avengers that was written by Roy Thomas and drawn first by John Buscema, and then with a few issues by the great Gene Colan and Barry Windsor Smith. Then John Buscema's brother, Sal Buscema. So it's a fairly stable art roster. And I love these issues. I absolutely, the nice thing about these big omnibus issues is that you get to see what you're buying. The back has the reprinted covers of all of the issues that are in here. And I love these issues. These are the issues of the Avengers when I first came to love the Avengers. I'd followed it pretty much from the beginning, but I didn't come to love the team until these issues, which start off, this run starts off with a new superhero appearing in town, Yellow Jacket, and he wants to marry Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp, but no one's ever heard of him before, and Janet Van Dyne has long been the girlfriend of Hank Pym, Goliath, Giant Man, Ant-Man, all the names that he goes under, and he's nowhere to be found. And when the Avengers question Yellow Jacket, he tells them the reason that Hank Pym is nowhere to be found is because Yellow Jacket killed him, to clear the way for not only marrying the Wasp, but joining the Avengers. And the Avengers, the team, is outraged, until Janet Van Dyne inexplicably says that she intends to marry Yellow Jacket and that it's her decision. And so they have a wedding issue where the Wasp, one of the founding members of the Avengers, is going to marry this stranger. And I remember the issue well. I remember the issue well. Let me get you to the part that bugged me. The superhero world gathers at Avengers Mansion in order to celebrate the wedding. And here we have this great panel. See, there is John Buscema drawing the superheroes of the Marvel Universe all gathered together to celebrate the upcoming wedding. But just as they're about to, the wedding is performed with all of the guests present, and then when the cake is cut, a python leaps out. Pythons don't do that, but that's all right. A python leaps out, and when it's disabled, the Avengers realize that it probably belongs to a member of an incredibly lame supervillain team called the Circus of Crime. And inexplicably, they tell their guests that it's an Avengers problem and they'll solve it themselves. And the guests all leave. and that's not the most inexplicable thing, because it turns out that the ringmaster and his Circus of Crime have been in the kitchen of the Avengers Mansion the whole time. They, in fact, knock the archer, Hawkeye, they knock him unconscious and hold him hostage along with the Avengers butler in the kitchen. And then when all the guests leave, they break out of the kitchen and start rampaging, and the Avengers have to fight them. And if the python belonging to a member of the Circus of Crime leapt out of a wedding cake on your wedding day and almost killed the bride, wouldn't you search the house? Would you want to know how it got inside the cake? Would you want to know anything like that? But not only that, but we're supposed to believe that when this gathering was taking place, the Circus of Crime was already on the premises. that when the python was in the cake, the villains were in the kitchen. When we have Spider-Man, who has a spider sense, we have Doctor Strange, who has otherworldly senses, we have the Black Panther and Daredevil, both of whom have super hearing, and nobody knows that these people are brooding in the kitchen. but that just underscores that Roy Thomas was mainly just big theme storytelling in these issues, not so much getting down into the nitty-gritty details. And it made me, rereading these issues, I absolutely love them. They have their high points and low points, but I absolutely love them. And it made me think about the Avengers. As I do whenever I get one of these big volumes. It's Marvel's, as you all know now, even if you don't follow comics, if you know the movies, then you know that it's Marvel's marquee superhero team, Earth's Mightiest Avengers. It's Earth's Mightiest Heroes. It's a collection of heroes that gathered together originally to stop Loki, the brother of Thor, the god of thunder. And those original Avengers were Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne. She was called the Wasp, he was called Ant-Man. Plus Iron Man, Thor, and the Hulk. And they gathered together to stop Loki, and they did, and then they decided, there's a kind of effectiveness in what we do here, maybe we should stay on as a team, and that presents an immediate problem. Ant-Man and the Wasp, fine. But if the rest of your team is Iron Man, the Hulk, and Thor, who are you going to get to fight that team? How's that team ever going to lose? And the Hulk leaves right away. He leaves in just an issue or two, and then they inevitably end up fighting him. But then, amazingly, about a year in, a little more than a year in, the Stan Lee decided to change the roster completely. By this time, Captain America had been discovered by the Avengers and thawed out of suspended animation from World War II, and most of the big hitters on the team left. Captain America was left with a team consisting of the Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, and the Archer Hawkeye, who is this guy, believe it or not. There was a period in Avengers history, this period, where Hawkeye decided to abandon being an archer and become Goliath. fans didn't like it. And the reason that you know that fans didn't like it is because these omnibus editions wonderfully reprint the letters from the original issues. So you can see the fans complaining in real time. And it's amazing. The letters are as much fun as anything else in these old volumes. The Captain America was suddenly the leader of a team of Avengers that consisted of 4 members, none of whom was exceptionally powerful. And I didn't think that would work, and it did. Those issues were tremendously entertaining, but slowly but surely, the roster started growing again. And this cover for the Omnibus Volume Number 3 was done by Alan Davis, a great artist named Alan Davis, and he must have put some thought into who he would put on his cover, because in my opinion, he has got the basic heart of the Avengers. The Avengers roster changes all the time. People come and go. In fact, there are a couple of letters in this volume that are reprinted that point out that Roy Thomas really has a refreshing approach to that fact. It's not a big event when new members drop in or drop out again. Roy Thomas just has people coming and going, and he doesn't make that big a deal out of it because that's kind of sort of the way it would probably work. A couple of those letters are quite cogent. And one of them in particular, from Iowa, is quite cogent. But Alan Davis here on this cover really gets you the heart of the Avengers. Unofficially, of course, but in a lot of longtime Avengers fans' minds, that quartet of Captain Americas really was an essential part of the Avengers. They didn't have enough power to be Avengers, really. But still, there was a chemistry there that was really good. And you have that here. You have Captain America, the Scarlet Witch, and Quicksilver, plus Hawkeye. He is on this cover. And then something about the married dynamic of Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne. The marriage has had disastrous low points and high points. And something about the fact that they both have three-dimensional lives outside of superheroing. Janet Van Dyne is a socialite, a wealthy socialite, and Hank Pym is a laboratory scientist who very often in the run of the Avengers says that he's more happy in the lab than he is avenging, that he feels kind of silly being a superhero. Something about that, the three-dimensionality of that, the believability of that, really appeal. It really appeals. It adds. They don't bring a lot of power to the table, but it adds an element of humanity to the Avengers that fans, including myself, have always liked. And you need Iron Man because the Avengers Mansion is his home. And also, you need Tech on the team. And the Vision was a character who was introduced by Roy Thomas. He was created by Roy Thomas. He's an android, as all of you know if you watch the Avengers, who really became sort of an emblem of the Avengers. There was a long time when the Avengers logo had the Vision just as its signature thing, not Captain America, just the Vision. So you really have to have him, especially once romance developed between him and the Scarlet Witch, with incurring resentment from Quicksilver. And the Black Panther, I mean, yes, he's the star of one of the highest-grossing superhero movies of all time. He now has a permanent berth in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and has reached an enormous audience. And he's had many runs on his own comic book, many different times, some successful, some not so successful. But I don't think he's ever been done better than when he's a member of the Avengers. And I think a big testament to the worth of the character is that he does that even though in this run of the Avengers, in most runs of the Avengers, he is basically Captain America, only without a shield. He's a super athlete. Heightened senses, heightened agility, heightened strength, heightened speed, but nothing to superhuman levels. It's the character of Prince T'Challa. It's the character of Black Panther that works so well in these issues and in the issues that follow this. And also Thor, which, you know, it presents a problem on its own. This lineup kind of sort of presents a problem on its own. It's a watered-down version of the problem faced by the Justice League over at DC Comics, mainly because everything about Marvel Comics is just watered-down DC Comics, but that's a rant for another day. Calm down, you marching Marvel maniacs. The problem is, you saw it in the Justice League before the Avengers existed. What do you do with power disparities on a super team? Super teams themselves make sense because the bad guys team up. So you want and also some emergencies, even without bad guys, are so big you need more than one hand on deck. But with the Justice League, you have Superman, Wonder Woman, the Martian Manhunter, who's a foundational Justice League DC superhero character who never caught on with the public. I maintain because he has, it's a very simple explanation, but I maintain it's because he has a rotten code name. I think if he'd been called the Martian, just the Martian, he would have caught on. But one way or another, he's almost as powerful as Superman. And then you've got Wonder Woman, and you've got Superman, and you've got the Green Lantern, who can do anything with his ring. You get enough of those people together, and not only do you have a hard time coming up with menaces that are convincing for the team. I mean, what's a team of bank robbers going to do against Batman alone? Much less Batman backed up by someone who can hold up a planet on his shoulders. Not only that, but also when you have a team roster like that, what are the less powerful members going to do? I mean, I know that we live in an age that worships the ground that Batman walks on, but what is Batman or Aquaman supposed to do on a Justice League lineup that includes Superman, Wonder Woman, the Martian Manhunter, and Green Lantern? You have to take those characters off the board, or you have to come up with some extremely unconvincing way to occupy them in order to give anybody else anything to do. And that wasn't the problem when you had Captain America's quartet of heroes. You had Quicksilver, who's super fast, but he's not like the Flash. He can't run faster than the speed of light or anything nonsensical like that. He's just very fast. And you have the Scarlet Witch, who has an unpredictable hex power. She can't, at this point in her development as a character, she can't warp reality at will or anything like that. She can just cause funny things to happen. And she, unlike her male counterparts, tires quickly. She can only do a few hexes at a time before she can't do anything at all. And Hawkeye has, of course, his bow and arrow, but he's a normal man. And Captain America, especially in this iteration, is just a normal man, an excellent athlete, an excellent acrobat, and with a shield. But the Captain America who exists nowadays in the comics is borderline superpowered, thanks to the Marvel Ultimate line, which we will, one of these days on these comic stem winders, we will get to it. But one way or another, because that quartet had relatively limited superpowers, it was easy to give them thrilling adventures. Then you bring in Ant-Man and the Wasp again, okay, fine. Then Ant-Man becomes Goliath, all of a sudden you have an enormous amount of physical power on the team, but still not off the charts. And then you bring in the Vision, who can control his density, so that when he's at his most dense, he's incredibly powerful, more physically powerful than Goliath. But he can also fire energy beams and turn intangible, and he has a computer mind, and all of a sudden, the old problem starts to crop up again. But it's really when you bring on Thor that the problem becomes as noticeable as it is on the Justice League, which is if you have a team full of costume superheroes who have, great powers but also limitations, and then you bring on a god of thunder who never gets tired, is stronger than anyone in the Marvel Universe with the possible exception of the Hulk, and has an enchanted hammer that can command lightning, well, then what are you going to do? Of course you're going to usher him off stage before you have the circus of crime break out of the kitchen and start using Tommy guns because Thor could handle them in his sleep. And that problem crops up over and over again. Even in this run, it does. Roy Thomas handles it really well. But we've seen it, even in earlier discussions on this channel about the Avengers. What do you do with something like Thor if he's on the team? Actually, before this volume, in the previous volume to this, the Avengers faced a small-scale version of that, because when Captain America and his original team, his original quartet, were running the comic, briefly Hercules joins the team. And he doesn't have the command over the elements, and he can't fly, but he's more powerful than anyone, except, he's as physically powerful as the Hulk on a team full of people who are very much not. And that created interesting hurdles for Stan Lee and for Roy Thomas, and that crops up throughout this book, but boy, oh boy, it doesn't slow Roy Thomas down at all. He is such an inventive writer. This run features Dane Whitman, the Black Knight. It features Red Wolf, an American Indian hero who is done really well. It features lots and lots of great background on Hawkeye, either as Goliath or as Hawkeye, including his name. We learn the character's name. We learn his background. For the first time, he was Wolverine before Wolverine, in that the character was a fan favorite, loved by all in comics for years and years without anyone knowing anything about him. without anyone knowing not even his origin, but his name. Roy Thomas just keeps it coming. He just keeps the inventiveness coming. He invented adamantium, the most powerful, the densest metal in the Marvel Universe in these issues, and brought on a whole bunch of supervillains who do a great job. Do a great job of keeping the team busy. But there's also lots of character interaction as well. I was noticing that when I was rereading it. Not only how well Roy Thomas incorporates the Black Panther into the team without ever making him a superhero. We are repeatedly reminded in the course of this run that Black Panther is a cultural icon, not a superhero. He's a king. And the identity of Black Panther is a cultural icon in Wakanda. He just happens to be allied with this team because he really likes their heroism. Same thing is true of Thor. When on the few occasions in this run where he actually mentions why he would be bothering with the Avengers, he mentions that he appreciates their valor. Although you can't help but notice in these issues. Something that Avengers fans have pointed out. In fact, the next volume, the next omnibus volume of the Avengers, if it reprints the letters, will reprint a very good letter from Boston that they ran of a fan who pointed this out about Thor 35, 40 years ago, which is that, yes, it's great to see him on the team, and yes, obviously he likes defeating the villains, but when you actually see how he treats his teammates, it's not particularly good. He is dismissive, not openly, but he almost never talks, just chats with any of his teammates, and usually the things he says to them are reprimands. Quit wisecracking. Get up and start fighting. Strike now. That sort of thing. It reminded me, reading this volume, of later, much, much later incorporations of the Avengers, when some second string, third string Avengers, Spider-Woman or something like that, would point out to established Avengers like Hawkeye that Thor has never even spoken to them. That they're on the team, yes, they fight supervillains, yes, but he has nothing to do with them. He's just there with them, but he is certainly not socializing with them in any way. I always think that's kind of interesting. I think that's probably the way it would work. If you had, a Norse deity on the team who's thousands of years old, he would probably have very little to talk about with his team members. One way or another. I love it when that happens, and I also love it when that doesn't happen. I love it when we see the camaraderie between, for instance, Thor and Iron Man and Captain America. There's a deep camaraderie between those three. And also the issues here, they're just one or two issue in and done storylines. There's none of the epic stuff that goes on later in Marvel Comics. The closest that you get is the revival of the supervillain Ultron, which again you'll know him from the movies, but also something going on with the Android Avenger, the Vision. Something going on with him. Something weird in his origin. That Roy Thomas, who was a comic historian, you can always count on the past resurfacing in Roy Thomas comics. You can tell that he's been thinking a lot about it, and then he's revealing it piecemeal intentionally. One of the key giveaways in this run is an issue where the three Avengers, Captain America, the Black Panther, and the Vision, are transported to an alternate 1940s. And suddenly find themselves fighting the greatest heroes of the 1940s, which is Captain America. No, it's not Captain America who goes back in time. I've got that wrong. It's the Vision, Yellow Jacket, and Black Panther go back in time. And they find themselves fighting Captain America from the 1940s, the Human Torch, the original Human Torch, the android Human Torch, and Prince Namor the Submariner. Which is, this took place a few years before Roy Thomas, I think maybe 10 years before Roy Thomas got permission from Marvel to do a comic book about that team in the 1940s called The Invaders. A terrific comic that really deserves a big volume like this. I have a few of the paperback reprints, but I could really stand a big version like this because The Invaders was wonderful. But when the Human Torch, the original android Human Torch, fights the android Vision in that fight, for one or two panels, fans were given a hint that maybe Roy Thomas had something bigger in mind. Just fascinating stuff. The big epic storylines that I mentioned that do not happen in these issues happen right after this volume. The next volume will have two of them at least. And I'm not decrying them at all. They're wonderful. It's just that they speak to a demographic change in comic readership. They assume that your readers will follow along, that they will be there for the whole. It's not a question of you entertaining one group of people who are going to pay 15 cents for this one issue. Instead, you're counting on people sticking around and paying attention to even little subplots over the course of half a year. And that is new thinking. That wasn't true in comic books up until Roy Thomas and a couple of other people started inventing it. And now it's the whole of comics. That has completely taken over. For good or ill. I think as much good as ill. But even so, before you get to those big storylines, I loved revisiting these issues. And I'm so happy to have this. I'll just put it on the shelf next to Omnibus number 2. And I guess I'll keep an eye out for Omnibus number 1 if it shows up as a remainder, because those issues are less enjoyable for me, more scattershot and more amateurish than these or any others that come. But I think I still would reread them enough to justify buying that omnibus. So I will keep an eye out for it. But in the meantime, that is your tedious, windy digression about comics this week. It's about the Avengers, and not just the Avengers, but the Avengers in 1970, when everything was better. So that's it for now. I'll wrap this up, and we'll be back to books in no time. Thank you, BookTube.